#1 most watched network in the whole country right now? Ta-da! Univision. For the month of July, the Spanish-language network Univision has had more viewers under the age of 50 than CBS, than NBC, than Fox, than everybody. They put out an open letter to all the other networks, taunting them with the news today. Numero uno is the new #1. We are the new American reality. And then to add injury to the insult, they ran that open letter in the New York Times where everybody could see it. And yes, this is of competitive interest if you care about competitive interest in the TV business, which you probably don't. But even if you don't, this is also of huge political interest for everyone in the country. Because what is happening on the most watched TV channel, the most watched TV network in the whole country, is that their flagship politics show is doing interviews now with Republican congressmen about whether or not those Republicans really do think that immigrants are like dogs. And they ought to be thought of as such by native-born Americans.
In a town hall meeting in Iowa, you actually compare immigrants to dogs. And many
I thought you would probably repeat yourself on that. I've told you, if you watched that video, you would know that was a speech celebrating legal immigrants. Legal, not illegal immigrants, legal immigrants. And I said they are the cream of the crop. It's the vigor of America that comes because people from all donor civilizations on the planet want to come here. They dream. We get the best.
So you don't want to apologize for that comment,
Congressman? That was the speech, and it's been mischaracterized by people on the left. It's been intentionally and dishonestly done so to drive wedges between people on the base of race.
So
and
you
I think it's a sin to do that, Jorge.
So from your point of view, you actually did not compare immigrants to dogs.
I said that speech was about the vigor of legal immigration. It was a very complimentary speech, and no, I did not do that. I did not do that. And you should go back and look at the video. In fact, show the whole video on Univision, and you'll know that.
It is, it is not complimentary to compare a group of people,
I
immigrants,
didn't do that
to
if you watch.
It is not complimentary to compare a group of people to animals. Can we agree on that? You probably suspect this by now, but the Univision anchor there, Jorge Ramos, is the one who's right in that fight, and Steve King is wrong. Cue the Republican congressman compares immigrants to dogs. Tape, please.
You want a good bird dog, and you want one that's going to be aggressive, pick the one that's the friskiest, the one that's engaged the most, and not the one that's over there sleeping in the corner. If you want a pet to sit on the couch, it's the one that's sleeping in the corner. You get the pick of the litter, and you got yourself a pretty good bird dog. Well, we got the pick of every donor civilization on the planet because it's hard to get here. They had to be inspired to come. We got the vigor from the planet to come to America.
See, immigrants, they're the frisky kind of dog. And when you pick your immigrant, make sure you pick yourself a frisky dog immigrant, not a lazy dog immigrant in America, because immigrants are just like dogs. Steve King said that thing about immigrants and dogs last year. This weekend, on the most watched television network in the country, on Univision, anchor Jorge Ramos went back at Steve King for it again and again and again, making sure that the congressman did not want to apologize for comparing immigrants to dogs. The congressman did not want to apologize for it. He wanted to keep explaining on the most watched TV network in the country in any language why he and other Republicans are opposed to immigration reform. Tomorrow, the House of Representatives takes up immigration reform again, a subcommittee that Steve King is on, as it happens. And so we will get to hear those kinds of arguments again. Those things are supposed to be not as raw, not as out in the open in the U.S. Senate as they are sometimes in the House. But in the Senate, the no side has been pretty out there as well. Republican Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama was reportedly working the crowd last week in D.C., and Republican Senator Ted Cruz was on the list of speakers at this Republican rally against immigration reform when talk turned to immigrants having donkey DNA.
From those incredible bloodlines of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and John Smith, and all these great Americans and Martin Luther King, these great Americans that built this country, you came from them. And the unique thing about being from that part of the world, when you learn about breeding, is you learn that you cannot breed Secretariat to a donkey and expect to win the Kentucky Derby. You guys have incredible DNA, and don't forget it.
See, donkey DNA crossing with American good DNA. That's why we can't have immigration reform. Senator Jeff Sessions, Senator Ted Cruz, Congressman Immigrants Are Like Dogs, Steve King, all were billed as part of that rally on Capitol Hill. The reporter for The Nation who captured that audio said that Jeff Sessions was standing right next to him when he did it, glad-handing the crowd while the donkey DNA thing resonated. Another one of the prominent no votes against immigration reform in the Senate was Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. News today about Senator Rand Paul that was maybe overshadowed by all the royal babiness. Rand Paul today lost his Southern Avenger. Senator Rand Paul had hired as a senior Senate staffer this man, who goes by the name the Southern Avenger. As a commentator and pundit and radio host, he would wear a Confederate flag wrestling mask and opine on avenging the South. John Wilkes Booth was right. John Wilkes Booth, of course, assassinated President Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth's heart was in the right place. I raise a personal toast every May 10th to celebrate John Wilkes Booth's birthday. Modern Americans are not wrong to deplore the millions of Mexicans coming here now. A non-white majority America would simply cease to be America. And this was one of my favorites. Just because we have fair skin, we are always denied fair treatment. Those were all quotes from the Southern Avenger in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. In 2009, he was reaffirming his Southern Avenger name and explaining, quote, "In my early 20s, I was a full-blown right-wing radical. As a member of the Southern secessionist group, the League of the South, I argued seriously for the states of the old Confederacy to break away from the rest of the Union. Years later, he said, I thought it might be better to tone down the radicalism and at least try to appear more respectable. But when I came across an old column of mine last week, I realized that I never really changed. I'm still just as radical or crazy, depending on your perspective. In fact, I might be getting worse." And he goes on to defend the idea that the South now should go Confederate again and secede from the Union, since America is becoming too different, too diverse, too multicultural. So the South should secede again. So he argued in 2009, and it was less than a year later that Rand Paul hired the guy to write his book. And then he hired him onto his Senate staff. And after a conservative website did a detailed report on the Southern Avenger's background earlier this month, Rand Paul responded by saying, "Are we at a point where nobody can have had a youth?" For a couple of weeks now, Rand Paul has been standing by his Southern Avenger staffer. But today he finally cut him loose. The first half of the day had the Southern Avenger resigning so as not to be a distraction to Senator Rand Paul as he mounts a probable run for president. But then later in the day, Senator Paul described it as a mutual decision between himself and his longtime Confederate flag mask-wearing alter ego, who, after all, did write the senator's book for him.
This is true that he is resigning, and I think because of the views he had expressed before my employment, it became a distraction and it just wasn't.
Did you ask him to resign?
It was a mutual. I think everybody occasionally has people that work for them that sometimes have a background that damages what you're trying to do. And so we'll see. Only time will tell. But I think people can judge me on who I am and what I'm trying to do rather than, trying to go after, one of my employees and say, oh, this is all about you.
Was he fully vetted, and are you going to change your vetting process?
Let's try another issue. Anybody else got another issue?
Anybody else got another issue? Today, while all eyes were on London and the royal baby and the happy news there, today here in Washington, they started fixing the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. The memorial overall is pretty stunning in person. I have to say I am a fan. But arguably, they screwed up part of it. They took the core of a sermon that Dr. King had delivered in 1968, just a few weeks before he was assassinated. It was a sermon that criticized the impulse in social movements for people to want to be seen as leaders, to want to be seen as out in front of the people, wanting to be seen as drum majors instead of as marchers themselves. The memorial took that sermon and nutted it up in a way that many people felt twisted its meaning. The memorial just said, etched into the stone, I was a drum major for justice, peace, and righteousness. Which is kind of an appropriate keyword index to what Dr. King said, but is pretty much the opposite of the spirit in which he meant it. So today, here in Washington, D.C., they started fixing that. They're going to score new, deep grooves into the stone to take out the screwed up inscription. They want it done before the 50th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech, March on Washington, which is going to happen late next month. We have a peculiar knack in this country for getting it wrong on race. Even the most deliberate, literally carved in stone, best-intentioned things we do about race, we have a talent for screwing up. Mistakes get made. But when do they start self-correcting? When do we get the equal and opposite political reaction that forces a change to what we've got now, which is Republicans going on Spanish-language television to lie about their record comparing immigrants to dogs before their side probably prevails in Congress in blocking immigration reform? Nobody is perfect, but how do we get more perfect than this? Because what we have got right now is absolutely terrible. Joining us now is my friend E.J. Dionne, Washington Post columnist, senior fellow at Brookings. E.J., it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you. Buenos noches.
Indeed. You know, the country is not nearly so bad off with regard to race as we were half a century ago, but then, you know, we hear an elected conservative congressman comparing immigrants to dogs, saying that was somehow celebratory, and his side is likely to win to stop important legislation in the House. Why is that part of our politics so stuck?
Well, I actually still think there's a chance for that in the House because I still think those folks are in a minority. But I think we are in a kind of regressive period. We've gone through a number of cycles like this in our history. We fought a civil war. We had Reconstruction. African Americans got equal rights in the South. There were prominent African American elected officials. And then we had the reaction. The Southerners who threw out the Reconstruction government called themselves redeemers. I'm sure the Confederate Avenger identifies with those redeemers. And then we went through a long period of real regression, until the time that W.E.B. Du Bois started writing, and it took him a long time. And we went backwards on race, and then we went forward again in the civil rights years. And I think what's really disturbing right now is that there was a long time where even people who had been against the civil rights bills felt an obligation to speak in a certain way about race, that they felt an obligation to say, I believe in the equal dignity of immigrants and of African Americans. Since Obama's election, and maybe a little bit before that, we've pulled back some.